the 5 most important pieces of skatepacking equipment and why you need them. Number 1, a good backpack. Skatepacking, you always want to be ultra light. Pack as little as possible. That means something like a 65-liter bag, not great. But something like a 20-liter bag is probably impractical unless you have really expensive gear. For me, the best size is a 45 to 40-liter backpack. It's important to have a good backpack that fits you, otherwise you won't be comfortable. A little controversial, the number 2 most important piece of gear for me is a good sleeping pad, more than a tent or a sleeping bag. A sleeping pad keeps you insulated from the ground, and the ground has a lot higher heat capacity than the air. So if you're on some cold ground, you will never get warm no matter how nice your sleeping bag is. My favorite is the typical foam pad. It's lightweight, it's reliable, you can cut it to the exact size you need. A big mistake people make is buying an uninsulated inflatable pad. They're really cheap, they're not very durable though, and they don't insulate you, which makes them more or less useless. Then, my favorite, but not something you should rely on, is a really good insulated ultralight pad. These are expensive and they still pop, which is why I always have a foam pad if I really need the reliability of it. Okay, the number 3 most important thing you have is your sleeping bag. Your sleeping bag should be your most expensive piece of gear, and an expensive sleeping bag will save you the most weight and space. There are 2 types of sleeping bags. We have our synthetic bags and then our down insulated bags. A synthetic bag's really good because even in the wet, they will still insulate you, whereas down feathers tend to bunch up and then they don't insulate you. But down feathers are way more lightweight, and unlike a synthetic bag, they won't wear out over time and become less effective. You can get a really cheap down bag from China. I think they're all right. Here's a Wind Hard. This cost $70 when I bought it. Or you can even buy a cheap bag and fill it with more down, which is really good value. They also sell down sleeping quilts. A quilt is nice because it has no insulation on the bottom. When you lie down on a sleeping bag, the part you're lying on doesn't insulate you. But if you move a lot, a sleeping bag's good because then you can roll and you'll always have coverage. Number 4, tents. They're not as important as you think. You can get away with a good ground cover and a good tarp for pretty cheap. Really, the advantage of tents is that they stop bugs and they give you a little bit more heat than something like a tarp. Now you have 2 types of tents really. You have your regular tent with the rain fly and a body, and then you have your bivy sack, which is hardly a tent. It's more like a bag that you sleep in. Bivy sacks are cheap and they take up almost no space and they're really durable, which is why they're good for skate packing because you can just sleep in the bushes, but they don't breathe very well, meaning water builds up in them and you're constantly wet. If you have a synthetic bag, that's not a problem. It's a little miserable, but the plus side of that is that the bivy sacks are so enclosed they give you an extra 10 degrees of heat. What I'd really recommend is you get a 2-person tent and then put it in a stuff sack. It saves a lot of space, it's pretty cheap, they're really useful. And then if you're really feeling bougie, you can get an ultralight tent. Ultralight tents don't weigh anything and they take up hardly any space, but the downside is, unlike a bivy, they're not as durable. So if you went somewhere with 50 miles per hour winds, you wouldn't be able just to set up this tent in the middle of a field because they could get blown over and stuff could tear easily. Number 5, the most important thing is the small stuff. That's kind of a cheap answer, but you really need a good headlamp. That's really important. A rain fly, keep your bag dry, possibly, or you could use a trash bag. First aid kit's really important because I tend to fall down when I'm skating. Skate packing is all about being as lightweight as possible while still enjoying yourself. So I really like these inflatable pillows. I wake up a lot better and I have a lot better time the whole time. And then another thing that people should do, we usually use smart water bottles. They're lightweight, they slip into the bag really easily. So the smart water bottles are also nice because their threading fits the Sawyer water filter perfectly. And water filters, of course, are very important and something else you need. I like to keep a dirty water bottle and a clean water bottle so that way I can squeeze it through the filter when I need it instead of having to do it on the spot. Is usually don't use like something like an Nalgene. Nalgenes are kind of heavy. There's everything you need to go skate packing. What I'd recommend is buy a foam pad, a 2-person tent, a good backpack that fits you well, and then a good sleeping bag.
Going down the road feeling bad, honey, babe, Lord. Going down the road